You're welcome to fall asleep to this. There's no quiz at the end. You are standing on a riverbank in the dark. This is the Nile at its lowest. In a few weeks, it will rise until the fields are gone. The villages will sit in it like islands, and the people here will call that morning the opening of the year. Right now, it is an hour before the sun, and the water is barely moving. Tonight, we let 3,200 years go by, and we stay for all of it. The river coming up and going down, and the harvest. And then the 5 days at the end that belong to no month at all, the days the scribe sometimes left out of the record, as if they had not happened. Nobody down there is looking at the sunrise. They are looking at the river. The sun comes up over the eastern desert, and the water turns from black to bronze to gold. This is the first day of the first month, and the Egyptians call it the opening of the year. The season it opens is called Achet. Achet means the flood. The flood has not arrived. The land is still cracked and pale and waiting for it. It is a day for beginnings that cost nothing. People clean. People give small gifts, a jar, a bead, a folded square of new linen. Across the river, at the great temple, there are rituals nobody out here is invited to. On this side, the new year is mostly a good breakfast, and the day without war. Their calendar has 365 days and no leap day, so it drifts. A day every 4 years, quietly for century after century. Right now the drift is small, 2 or 3 weeks. Their great-grandparents saw the New Year land exactly on the flood. This generation nearly does. Their grandchildren will not. And nobody moves the festivals to fix it. That is not how it is done. The feast stays where the calendar says. The river comes when the river comes. The two of them walk apart, slowly, over hundreds of years, and no one alive will see the far end of it. There is a small ache in that, and everyone in this room is used to it. Down on the plain, the farmers are waiting for water. But we are not going with the farmers. We are going the other way, away from the river, into the desert, up to a village where nobody owns a field, where nobody needs one. They are walking there now, in the last cool hour of the morning. So, the village has one street, a wall of mud brick around a long rectangle, a gate at the north end, and a single lane down the middle. The houses are packed along both sides. They share their wall. There are no gaps between them, about 68 of them in this generation, and a little over 100 paces from one end to the other. The people who lived here called it, simply, the village. The scribes had grander names, the place of truth, the necropolis. Among themselves, it was just the village. The name you may have heard for this site is Arabic, and it is 3,000 years too late. Nobody standing in this lane would know what you meant. The floors of these houses came up layered with trodden dung. Goat, sheep, pig pressed flat by 3 centuries of feet. The street was the same. It was not squalor. It is simply what 100 paces of desert looks like when a few hundred people and their animals live inside it together, and there is no well, no spring, no water inside the wall at all. Every drop had to be carried in from the green land, a couple of kilometers down the hill. It was poured into big jars kept in a store just outside the north gate. The men who carried it were not villagers. They came, they filled the jars, and they left again. So the village breathes twice a day. Things come in, people go out. Water, fish, vegetables, firewood, pots, oil, all of it arrives from somewhere else, carried by people who sleep somewhere else. And what the village makes, it makes on the far side of the hill, in the dark. By lamplight, nothing that matters here happens where you can see it. The people who bring all that have a name in the records. The service personnel. Fishermen, gardeners, woodcutters, potters, launderers, water carriers. They are attached to the crew, but they are not of it. They arrive, they hand over, they go back down. And the village they go back to is not this one. One of those jobs is washing. Somebody takes the linen of 68 houses down to the water and brings it back. It is a full occupation, it is recorded, and it is paid in grain like everything else. The whitest cloth in Egypt is worn by men who spend their days covered in limestone dust. Step through one of these doors and the temperature drops. The house is narrow and deep. They all are. It runs back from the street in 4 parts, each one a little different from the last. The doorway has a limestone frame, and cut into the frame, the name of the man who lives here. You do not knock. The cloth is either up or it is down. The first room is sunk below the street, a step or two down, about knee deep. And in one corner of it, there is a thing nobody has been able to explain. A rectangular box of mud brick, plastered and painted, big enough to lie in. 3 steps up to it. 28 of the 68 houses had one, and after 100 years of digging, we still argue about what it was. The paintings that survive on them show women, childbirth, a newborn being held, and the squat, cheerful, lion-faced god who guards exactly that. So some think it was a bed for giving birth and for the weeks after. Others think it was an altar for the family's dead. Others think the whole sunken room was a small garden. It is nice sometimes not to know. Past that is the main room. It is the tallest space in the house. 1 or 2 wooden columns on stone bases hold the ceiling up, and a long bench of mud brick runs down one wall. This is where the family sits and eats and prays. Behind it, there is a smaller room. And behind that, the kitchen, half open to the sky so the smoke can leave. And at the back, there are stairs going up. On a summer night, the roof is the coolest place a person can be. Half the village is up there on mats in the moving air. Below them, the lane is black. Above them is a sky that nothing on earth is bright enough to spoil. And the roof is not only for sleeping. It is where the grain is dried and the fish is salted and the flax is laid out, and where anything that needs the sun goes. In a house with 4 small rooms, the largest usable surface a family has is the one with nothing over it. There is a niche cut into the wall of the main room. A shallow one, at about the height of a seated person's eyes, with a painted panel around it in red and yellow. It looks like a small door. Below it stands a low table of limestone with a bowl on it. Almost every house in this village has one. What they kept in the niche was their own dead. Small carved stones dedicated to the excellent spirit of a father, a brother, a husband, and little busts, a head and shoulders, no name, no face, you could pick out of a crowd. Most of them are women, someone's mother, someone's wife, kept in the wall of the room where the family ate. And the dead could still act, not as a comfort, as a fact, with consequences. A dead relative could help you, or could be the reason things had gone wrong, could be asked, could be appeased. So people wrote to them. Actual letters on broken pottery addressed to somebody who had died. Complaining, pleading, asking them to do something about it. On another wall there is a king. He had been dead 2.5 centuries when this paint went on, and his mother is beside him. He was made a god after he died, and this village took him as its own. Not the king on the throne now, far away in the north, this one, their king. The one who answers questions literally. On festival days, his statue came out through the village on men's shoulders, and people put questions to it, written on pottery, laid on the ground, one for yes, one for no, and the god moved, forward or back. Nobody in that lane thought of it as theater. It was how you found out who had taken the tool. The questions are written plainly, and they are not grand. Is the ox that was taken the ox of this man? Shall the plot go to the son? Is he the one who stole the tool? Somebody kneels, lays 2 sherds down, and a god carried by 4 of his neighbors moves half a step. And you could appeal. People asked the same question twice on different days, and sometimes got a different answer, and that is in the record too. A god who can be asked again is a god who is part of the procedure. Nobody treated this as the end of the argument. They treated it as a ruling. In the south end of the village, in a group of houses newer than the rest, there lives a man called Sennedjem. His title is Servant in the Place of Truth. Every man here carries that title. He worked for the last king, and he works for this one. He is old now. How old, we will never know. His body has never been examined. His wife is Iineferti. Her titles are Mistress of the House and Singer of Hathor. She will live a long time, into her 70s at least. And when her body was examined, they found she had lost her teeth and that her spine had worn through. She grew old on this floor, in this heat, in this room. It is written on her bones. Late in her life, she put up a stone. She and one of her sons paid a craftsman to carve a prayer on it, to the moon and to the sun. And the line she chose to have cut into it is this: Be merciful to me, for you have made me see darkness in the daytime. She was going blind, and she said so in public on stone. Their eldest son is Quebecnet, named after his grandfather. He is a servant in the place of truth too. He has his own house on the west side, and he is cutting his own tomb into the slope just above his father's. In this village, a man does not inherit land. He inherits a job, a house he does not own, and a hole in the hillside. And down in the chamber, Sennedjem is preparing for himself. A painter is working on the east wall. There is a green country on it. a crop coming up. Sennedjem is behind a plough, and Iineferti is behind him, and the barley is over their heads. He is old, and he is a stone cutter, and he has never held a plough in his life. Ned has his own house on the other side of the lane, and his own place on the crew, and his own name in the register. He is also, confusingly, named after his grandfather, which means that in the documents from this village, the same name belongs to two men, a generation apart, and scholars have been untangling that for 100 years. When a man leaves his son here is a job, a house he does not own, and an unfinished hole in the hillside. That last one matters more than it sounds. A tomb that is not finished when you die gets finished by whoever is left, and there are chapels on this slope that were completed by grandchildren. The work is on the far side of the hill, and there is no way around it. You go over. It takes about half an hour on foot, up a path worn into the rot by 250 years of the same men going the same way. They leave before it is properly light. By mid-morning, the stone will not let you touch it. The ground up here is covered in seashells, fossil shells, some of them as big as a fist. 30 million years old, from when all of this was the floor of a sea. The men walk over them every single morning in the dark on their way to work. You cannot come up this path without stepping on one. At the top, there is a moment. On a clear morning, you can see 40 kilometers east, all the way to the hills that stand between here and the Red Sea. Behind you is the valley where you work, dry, closed, silent. In front of you is the river and everything green and the smoke of the city. Then you turn around and go down the dry side. Some of them will go home tonight, most will not. Staying up here saves half an hour of walking at each end of the day, which does not sound like much until you have done it every day for 30 years. So in the saddle between the two valleys there is a second village. Small, stone, and only for sleeping. For a long time everyone assumed nobody really lived up here. No hearths had been found. No cooking, no water stored. Then a team went back and dug again, and found hearths everywhere, inside the huts and outside them. They'll put the fire back. There was smoke on this ridge in the evenings, and men cooking on it over a dead valley. Each hut has 2 rooms, an inner one for sleeping, and an outer one with benches of limestone blocks set along the walls in a U. That U is exactly the shape of the wooden furniture in their houses down in the village. They climbed the mountain and rebuilt the room they had left in stone, because that was the shape a room was supposed to be. One hut is bigger than all the others, and it sits in the middle. 3 rooms, and every floor paved with limestone slabs. It belongs to the scribe, not the foreman, the scribe. In this village, the man who writes is the man with the power, because the record of who worked and who did not, and what is owed, is the record he keeps. They had a word for these places, and it was not the word for house. A house was the thing inside the village wall. It belonged to the crew. You lived in it because of your job, and you could not sell it. A hut was different. A hut was yours. You built it, so you owned it, and you could leave it to your son. Some men slept in them when they were ill. They were not alone up here. They were doorkeepers. There were guardians who held the keys to where the tools were. And there were police, 8 of them, assigned to the tomb. By this century, those men were local, whatever their name suggested. They were simply the ones whose job it was to be awake while everybody else was not. And on the rocks along this path there are marks. Not writing, marks. Each man had one, a small sign that stood for him, cut into his tools, his jars, and the stone beside the path. Not everyone in this village could read. Everyone could sign. The marks are still there, on the way up, waiting for a shift that is not coming. The marks were simple on purpose. A cross. A pair of lines. Shaped like a bird's foot. Something you can cut into copper or scratch into a jar in 2 seconds with cold hands. And they pass down. A son inherits his father's mark along with his father's place, which means the same sign is on tools a century apart, and the tools are counted. Copper is expensive, and copper blunts, and a blunted chisel goes back down the hill to be reforged and comes back later. So they are weighed out in the morning and weighed back in at night, and the difference is written down. A man's day here begins and ends on a balance. The valley on the other side has no water and no shade. What happens there is that men cut a room for a king out of solid limestone, and all of it happens by lamplight, not torches. Small pottery lamps, a wick of twisted linen, and oil. There is no moving air in a tomb corridor. Whatever you burn, you breathe. The wicks were counted, handed out in the morning, handed out again after the break, and counted back in at the end. Nobody in this village ever wrote down the hours they worked, but somebody wrote down the wicks. And from a list of wicks, you can reconstruct a working day, 2 stretches of about 4 hours, with a pause between them in the worst of the heat. They were not slaves. They were state employees. They had a foreman, a deputy, a scribe, and a court of their own. And they had a wage, and the wage was grain. 4 sacks of wheat a month for bread, and a sack and a half of barley for beer, handed over on the last working day. These are the men who built the tombs of the pharaohs. They were paid in flour. And around the grain came everything else. Fish, vegetables, water, firewood, pottery, oil for the lamps, linen for clothes, cakes and dates when there were cakes and dates, meat and salt at festivals. All of it delivered by people who did not live inside the wall. The whole village ran on things arriving on time, which is a fragile way to live in a desert. Some of these men were not cutting at all. They were drawing. Outline scribes, painters, the ones who laid the color on. A man spends his week making a wall glow for a king he has never met. Then he walks home over a ridge to a house with 1 lamp in it. The most beautiful painted rooms in the world, made by men on a monthly sack of wheat. And the water goes up there too. Everything the crew drinks in that valley was carried over the ridge or round the long way by donkey, and the jars are counted like everything else. On a day in high summer, a working man drinks his own weight in trouble. The village has no well, and neither does the workplace. There is a deputy under each foreman, and his job is the boring half of everything. He hands out the wicks and takes them back. He decides who works which face. He is the one who tells a man he is on the left side this decade and not the right. Nobody writes songs about the deputy. Everything works because of him. The deeper it goes, the harder it gets to get the rock out. Baskets go hand to hand up a passage that is now longer than the lane the men live on. And at the top, somebody tips it into a heap on the slope. See, that heap is still there. It is how the excavators found the door. This year, somebody in this village made a list. A slab of limestone about the size of a large book, written on both sides in a tight hand. It is an attendance record, 40 names down the right edge. Beside each name, dates in black ink. And above most of the dates, in red, one word or two, the reason that man was not at work. It covers about 280 days. Of those, only around 70 look like full working days. The rest is festivals, rest days, and absences, and the reason, written more often than any other, more than 100 times, is illness. Within that, again and again, the same two words in red, his eyes. Men who cut stone by lamplight in a sealed corridor, losing their sight slowly. The other reasons are the ones that make you put the book down. Brewing beer, or bitten by the scorpion, making his own door, building his house. His wife was bleeding, embalming his brother. And for 4 days in a row, one man is absent because he is looking after another man who is ill. Both of their names are on that stone. We know them. And the second most common reason for missing work was being away with your boss. Doing private jobs for him, on his own house, on his own tomb, that was not against the rules. It was allowed, as long as you did not take it too far. This was not a machine grinding men down. It was a workplace with a foreman who could let you off and a scribe writing down that he had. It was written in the 40th year of the king. It was made from smaller notes, kept day by day on little flakes of stone, and then copied up onto one big one. Somebody sat down with a pile of scraps and made a clean copy. And that is the only reason you know that. 3,000 years ago, a man missed work because a scorpion got him. The big stone was made from little ones. Somebody kept a running note every day on whatever broken pottery was nearest. A name, a date, 2 words. Those were the working record. The slab is the clean copy made once, at the end. Almost everything we know about how this village lived comes off the scrap paper. 40 names, and we can put a face to almost none of them. A few we know well. The foreman, the scribe, the men whose tombs are on the slope. The rest are a name and a column of dates and a reason in red, and that is the whole of what is left of them. And it is more than most people in that century got. And the reason it survived at all is that somebody threw it away. It went into a pit with the rest of the rubbish of this village, and the desert kept it. The documents that were looked after are gone. The ones that were discarded are in museums. That is how this whole century reaches us, through what nobody thought was worth keeping. 15 days into the new year, far to the south, priests walk down to the water. They go where the river comes through the last of the rocks, and they make an offering to the god of the flood. We know the exact day because they cut it into the cliff face. And we know it was done in the first year of this king, because his name is beside it. The god is called Happy, and he's not the river. The river is just the river. Happy is the flood, the arrival, a heavy blue figure with a belly bringing food. There is a hymn to him that schoolboys copied out to practice their writing. Broken pots turn up in this village with bits of it on them. Children learning to write, copying a poem about water, and there is news coming. Far to the south, at the frontier, there is a place where the water is measured. A stair of stone going down into the river inside a temple on an island with the levels marked on the walls. Whatever the river does, it does there first. What they see on that stair is what everybody downstream is about to get, and the boat carries that word faster than the water carries itself. From the frontier down to here is a day, 2 at most, not weeks. The water that rose down there yesterday is the water going past you tomorrow. So the news and the flood arrive almost together, and the difference between them is 1 day of knowing, which is all anybody has ever wanted. There is no announcement, no drums, no shouting. This valley falls about as much in 1,000 kilometers as a gentle roof falls across a room. So the flood does not charge in, it seeps. One morning, the mark you scratched on the bank yesterday is underwater, and that is the whole event. The biggest thing that happens in Egypt every year happens in silence. The hymn the boys are copying is not a prayer exactly. It thanks the flood for being food. It calls him the one who fills the storehouses and makes the workshops busy. It says that when he is slow, everything stops. It is an economic document written as worship, and children learn to write by copying it out. And there is a line in it that everybody in this valley could have recited. If he is sluggish, the noses of the people are blocked, meaning if the water is late, we suffocate. Not a metaphor about the soul. A statement about grain, written by somebody who had watched it happen and expected it to happen again. The first water to arrive is wrong. It comes up green, properly green, and it tastes foul and it smells worse. Everybody knows this is coming, and everybody is delighted when it does. Because the green water is the messenger. It means the real flood is behind it. So for a few weeks, people drink from stored jars and hold their noses and are happy about it. What makes it green is something none of them could possibly have known. Microscopic plants, blooming 1,000 kilometers upstream in clear water and hard sun. They come down in columns hundreds of kilometers long. We had it wrong too for a long time. We thought it was rot coming down out of the great swamp. It looks more now like the water is simply alive and on its way to you. Then, some weeks later, everything changes at once. The water turns brown, red, and thick, and it starts to climb properly. And the green dies on contact. Those little plants cannot live in muddy water, and they go out like a lamp. What has arrived now is soil, mountain soil, from a country these people have heard of and will never see, on its way to the fields. This is why they call their country the Black Land. Not the sand. The sand is the red land, the other one, the one you are buried in. The Black Land is this, the dark mud that arrives on the water every year and settles and makes everything else possible. A whole civilization named itself after the color of its dirt. The fields are gone now, under a hand's depth of moving brown water. In a few weeks they will come back, wiped clean, deeper and darker than they were. Everything these people grow and eat and store and argue about begins on the morning the water goes brown. That is why the year opens here, not in the spring, not in the cold, here. There is a way of measuring it that has nothing to do with priests. You put a stick in the ground where the water reached last year and you watch. Every family with land has a mark somewhere, a notch on a wall, a stone, a particular step. The national system is a temple stair. The domestic one is a scratch you made yourself. On the 20th day of the first month, the whole country gets deliberately drunk. This is not a lapse. It is a festival, and the state pays for it. Its purpose is to keep a goddess calm. Because the story goes that she once decided to kill everybody, and the only thing that stopped her was being given enough beer to fall asleep. In this story, the sun god cannot call her off. So he floods the fields with beer, dyed red with ochre until it looks like blood, and she drinks all of it, thinking it is exactly what she wanted, and she wakes up gentle. That is the whole theology of this evening. The most dangerous thing in the world can be made kind, if you give it enough beer. And it happens now in the first month for the same reason as everything else this month. A calm goddess means no plague. No plague means a good year. And a good year means the water comes up the right amount. 5 days ago, priests upriver made a very quiet offering for a good flood. Tonight, an entire town is doing the loud version of the same prayer. People sleep where they fall, on mats in the courtyard. And in the morning they are woken on purpose, with drums, to be shown the goddess. That is the point of it. You go to sleep in one state and you are woken into another. There is a porch at a temple not far from here that was built for exactly this generations before, and dug out again in our own time, a room for waking people up on purpose. The men of the village walk home along the desert path in the early light, with their heads full of drums. Behind them, the river is still rising. Tomorrow they will be back over the ridge, in a corridor with a lamp, and the festival will be a red word on a list, and nobody will write down that any of them enjoyed it. Not everybody goes down for a festival. Somebody always stays. The guardians stay, and whoever is ill stays, and the men on the wrong side of the road stay. And the village on a festival night is a handful of people on the roofs, listening to a party happening 4 kilometers away and 200 meters below. And there is a line from this village written on a pot that says, "Do not celebrate your feast without your neighbors." It reads like advice. It is probably closer to a rule. On a street this narrow, a party you were not invited to is a thing that lasts a year. By the height of it, the valley is a lake. The fields are gone. The villages sit on their mounds with water on every side, and between them there are boats, going where a path used to be, over the top of somebody's barley. The only things standing above the water are the mounds, the palm trunks, and the temples. The temples were built high on purpose. People move by water for weeks. You visit your cousin by boat. The priest crosses to the other bank by boat, and there is a small strangeness in gliding a hand's depth above land, you know. The top of a wall, just under the surface, a tree standing in water up to its waist, children fishing off a roof, and at night frogs in numbers you would not believe. And on the far bank the great festival of the season is underway, weeks of it. The god is carried from one enormous temple to the other and brought back along the river on a barge of cedar covered in gold, with ram's heads at both ends. Almost nobody ever sees the inside of any of it. They line the bank and watch the gold go past, which is, in fairness, the part worth seeing. The village on the hill is not part of that. It is a few kilometers away and a world away, up in the dry, where the flood cannot reach and does not matter. They hear it. They see the gold from a distance once and go back to work. Their year is not made of water. Their year is made of shifts and lamp wicks and a list of names. And under this hill there is an old man's tomb, half finished. He has spent 50 years cutting rock in a valley with no water in it. He could ask for anything on those walls, anything at all, to keep forever. He asked for a field, green and wet and full of barley, and he is walking through it behind a plough. It will take us the rest of the year to understand why. One more thing about the flood, and it concerns everybody who is not on this hill. The state could ask for your labor, not your grain, you. Digging a channel, raising a bank, carrying sand from one side of something to the other. Nobody wrote down a rule that says this happened during the flood. But the flood is when a farmer has nothing else to do, and we know exactly how much people wanted to avoid it, because of what they had buried with them. Small wooden figures of a person, a hand long, with a spell written down the front. If I am called to do work over there, the spell says, you go instead. And then it lists the work. Cultivate the fields, water the banks, carry sand from east to west. Carry sand from east to west. That is not a poetic phrase. That is a job, and everybody hearing it knew what it felt like in the shoulders. They believed there was work waiting on the other side, of exactly the kind they already knew. And they made arrangements about it in wood in advance. The water does not drain away at once, it sinks. Week by week, the brown sheet pulls back off the high ground, and something appears underneath it that was not there before. Not the old field, a new one. Flat, black, wet, completely smooth, as if somebody had come in the night and resurfaced the world. It is soft enough to sink into up to the ankle, and it is warm. The sun has been standing on it since the water thinned. All over the valley, people are walking out onto it just to look. They have done this every year of their lives. They still come out to look. There is a moment in the draining that everyone waits for. When the last water runs out of a basin, it takes the fish with it, and the fish do not all get out. They collect in the outlet, in a narrowing channel, in numbers. Men wade in with baskets and take them by the armload. The best fishing of the year happens as the flood leaves. Most of it is salted and dried on the roof. Some is eaten that night. Fish is the cheapest meat here, and nearly everybody has it. The tomb workers get theirs delivered. There are men whose whole job is to fish for the crew. And there are years when the fish arriving late is a problem worth writing down. Behind them, the water keeps going down. The channel's empty. The mounds turn back into villages with roads instead of shoreline. In a few weeks, this plain will be dry enough to walk across. and hard enough to break a plough on. By then, the sowing has to be finished. From here, it is a race against the mud drying out. One thing has to happen before anything is planted. The boundaries have to come back. The flood does not move the land, but it buries the markers. And every year somebody walks out with a neighbor and agrees again where one field stops. Most of the time it is agreement. Sometimes it is the court. And the mud itself is worth the sentence. It is not river dirt. It is topsoil of mountains 1,000 kilometers away, carried down in suspension and dropped here when the water slows. Somewhere upstream, a country is very slowly losing its highlands, and this is where they end up, a finger's thickness at a time. As the water goes, the temples begin their longest ritual. It runs for the last 12 days of the season. It is about Osiris, a god who was killed and cut apart and put back together and who came back. He is the god of the dead. He is also the god of grain. Those are not two jobs, they are one. On the 22nd day, there is a rite called simply plowing the earth. 4 days later, another. And near the end, they raise a pillar, a tall notched column that stands for the god's backbone, hauled upright with ropes while a crowd watches. A dead god's spine stood on end at the moment the fields come out of the water. A word of caution here. This ritual is the best documented in Egypt. But the detailed account, the one with every day and every ingredient, was carved 1,000 years after this. What is certain now is the shape of it. A god who dies and is planted, a pillar raised, and a country that has just watched a flood retreat, agreeing on what the story means. The villagers on the hill keep it too. There is a scratched note upon the rock above the valley, left during these very days by a man from this community. He climbed the mountain during the festival of the buried god. He wrote his name on the cliff for the goddess who lives up there. They'd had its ceremony at the temple. He had his on a rock alone. The men of the village are not farmers. None of this changes their week. They still go over the ridge, they still cut, but everybody here came from somewhere. Somebody's grandfather worked a field. And when the year turns like this, the whole valley is talking about the same thing. Even the people who will never plant anything. The plow is 2 pieces of wood and a rope, a curved beam, a hardened wooden point, and 2 handles to lean on. It does not turn the soil over, it opens it. A shallow groove through mud that is still soft, 4 fingers deep. That is all it needs to be. The land was plowed by the river. This is just opening the seam. The animals pulling it are not the cattle you are picturing. They have a hump over the shoulders. They came into Egypt from the east not long before this, and the yoke is not around their necks. It is lashed to the base of their horns. They pull with their heads. It is the sort of detail that tells you nobody here had seen it done any other way. A man walks behind with both hands on the handles. He keeps the point in the ground with his own weight. Somebody walks alongside with a stick and a rope, keeping the animal straight. It is slow. It is not heavy work by the standards of this valley, and it happens in the coolest weather of the year. This is the pleasant part. It does not last. Somewhere in this, there is a man with a bag at his hip, throwing grain out in an ark. And the truthful answer is that we do not know whether he goes first or second. Some tomb walls show the sower ahead of the plow. Some show him behind it. Both are probably right in different fields and different years. The argument has been running for 100 years. Then they drive animals across it. Sheep and goats, a whole flock let loose over the sown ground. Hundreds of small hooves press the grain down out of reach of the birds. A boy walks behind with a stick. And the field, for one afternoon, is loud. Then it is quiet again for 4 months. The plow gets rebuilt more than you would think because wood in this country is a problem. There are palms and acacia and tamarisk, and none of them give you a long straight piece. Anything big comes down the river from somewhere else and costs accordingly. A broken plow beam is a genuinely bad afternoon, and the animals are not everybody's. A pair of oxen is the most expensive thing most households will ever be near, and plenty of families do not have one. So they are lent and hired and shared and paid for in grain after the harvest. Half the plowing in this valley is done with somebody else's cattle. The main crop is a wheat you have probably never eaten. It is called emmer. Its grain is locked inside a tough husk that will not thresh free easily. Every meal in Egypt starts with the work of getting emmer out of its shell. It is stubborn, it stores well. And a whole civilization was built on the fact that it grows here without being asked twice. Alongside it goes barley, and barley is beer. Then flax, which is linen, the cloth everybody in this story is wearing. It is pulled up by the roots rather than cut. The fiber runs the whole length of the stem, and you do not want to lose any of it. Bread, beer, and clothing, all of it going into the same black mud in the same few weeks. Then the gardens, which are a separate world with separate rules. Onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, cucumbers, beans, lentils, melons, dates and figs and grapes, and pomegranates, which had arrived in Egypt not long before this and were still something of a luxury. The field feeds you. The garden is what makes the food worth eating. And here is the one machine in this entire year. A long pole on a pivot, a bucket on one end, a lump of mud on the other for a counterweight. A man pulls the bucket down into the channel. The weight lifts it back up for him. He swings it over and empties it. One of these was drawn in this very village, in these very years, in the tomb of a man called Ipui. But watch where he points it. He is watering a garden. Nobody is lifting water onto the grain fields. Nobody ever does. The wheat and the barley out there got all the water they will ever get in one go from the river months ago. The field drinks once a year. The garden drinks every day of its life. There are bees in some of these gardens, kept in long tubes of baked mud stacked on their sides, and the honey off them is worth real money. It sweetens, it preserves, and it goes into the physician's jars because it genuinely stops a wound turning. A hive here is a small piece of medical infrastructure. Every loaf in this village begins with a woman on her knees. A flat stone set into a low bench. A smaller stone in both hands. Grain between them. She leans her whole upper body into it and pushes forward and back. Not a mill that turns. That is another country in another 1,000 years. 2 stones and a person's weight, and this is where the teeth go. Not because anybody adds sand to the flour. That story goes around and it is not true. It is that grit gets in anyway. From the stone itself, from the threshing floor, from the wind. Look at the jaws of the people in this valley, and the molars are worn flat by middle age. Everyone here is chewing a little of the desert with every meal. The oven is a cone of clay standing about chest high, open at the top. It is heated with dung and chaff until the inside walls glow. Flat loaves go against the hot wall and come off in minutes. Others are baked in molds, tall pottery cylinders that stand in the fire. There are dozens of shapes of bread here. They had the name for every one of them. Beer comes off the same grain, and it is not what you were told. For about 100 years, the story was that they crumbled bread into water and let it go. Then somebody put the residues under a microscope. It turned out to be a real brewing process. Part of the grain malted, part of it cooked, the two mixed and left to work. Thicker than yours, cloudy, low in strength. Food more than drink. Everybody drinks it. Children drink it. It is safer than water from a jar that has been standing outside since yesterday. It carries real calories, and it is part of the wage, a sack and a half of barley a month for exactly this. A man here is paid in the ingredients of his own dinner. Then his wife turns them into it. These are the good months. The sun stops trying to kill you around the middle of the day. At night it is properly cold. Cold enough that people who own a second piece of linen wear both. The stone in the valley is workable all day. The walk over the reach is almost pleasant. If there is a season where nobody complains, it is this one. In the valley the corridor is getting longer. The rock comes out in baskets, hand to hand, up a passage that gets darker every week. When it is long enough, they start on the chambers. Then the plasterers come. Then the outline men. Then the painters. It takes years. Nobody on this crew expects a tomb to be finished quickly, and nobody expects to be told when. There is a foreman on each side of the crew, a deputy under each of them, and a scribe above all of it. The crew is split in two, left and right. They work the two walls of the same corridor toward each other. Two teams, one whole, meeting in the middle. Everybody knows exactly whose side is behind. And the scribe writes everything, who came, who did not. How much copper went out and how much came back, because copper chisels blunt and are reforged and are weighed. How many wicks, what was delivered and what was late. Tens of thousands of these notes survive from this village on broken pots. Pottery is free. Papyrus is not. On the 9th and 10th days of every 10, they go home. Down off the ridge in the late light, into the lane, through a doorway with their own name cut into the stone frame. 2 days, then back up. This is what a life looks like here. Men do it for 30 and 40 years. Some of them do it until their eyes go. Keeping a corridor straight inside a mountain is not obvious. They do it with cord and light. A line pulled from the entrance, marks set on the walls, and lamps placed so a man at the face can see the mark behind him. It is not instrumented. It is a straight line held by eye across 60 meters of dark. For level, they use a plumb line and a small wooden square, and for the ceiling, they use water in a trough. Simple tools, used carefully by people who have done it before. The corridors that came out of this method are straight enough that surveyors with instruments went in 3,000 years later and were impressed. And then one day, the two teams meet. Left side and right side, working toward each other along the same axis, and the last thin wall of rock between them comes out. Whether they were straight is settled in that moment, publicly, in front of everybody, and there is no way to fix it afterwards. The baby here is born at home, in the front room. Probably on that painted brick platform nobody can explain. Around the walls are the two gods you want in the room. A squat lion-faced one who frightens off whatever is trying to get in, and the standing hippopotamus with a woman's arms. Not the great gods of the temples, the household ones. The ones you can shout at. Children in this lane run barefoot. Their heads are shaved except for one long lock over the ear. They wear nothing at all until they are 7 or 8. They have balls of leather and linen and small carved animals and a board game with 30 squares that adults play too. What the rules of that game were, nobody now knows for certain. And some of them learn to write, not in a school with rows and a teacher at the front. As far as anybody can tell, there was no such building here. A boy sits beside a scribe and copies, model letters, hymns, stories. He writes on a broken pot because pottery is free. When the pot is full, he turns it over. When it is full again, he throws it away. Thousands of them came out of the rubbish. Most of them do not learn to write. Most of them learn to cut. A boy goes up the ridge with his father and holds things and carries baskets. Eventually, he gets a chisel put in his hand. The job passes down. A man's son takes his place on the crew. If he has no son, the place goes elsewhere. That is a real anxiety for a real number of people in this lane. And a lot of them do not grow up. That is simply true. And it is true everywhere in this century. The way you see it here is in the small coffins and the babies buried with flowers laid on them. In one of these houses, a child is going to die this year. And the family will keep a stone for them in the wall of the room where everybody eats. A child gets a name almost at once, and the name is not decoration. It means something you can say out loud. The god is content, or he belongs to the moon, or, quite often, simply beautiful. And it is the thing that has to survive. A name that stops being spoken is the actual definition of dying here. And then at some point the side lock comes off. Nobody wrote down the age, and it probably varied by household, but the meaning is clear enough from the pictures. You go from a child with one grade over the ear to somebody with a shaved head and a job. Somewhere in this lane that happens this year. The first day up the ridge is a real day in a life here, and it is not marked with anything. A boy walks out of the gate behind his father in the dark with a water jar and a basket and comes back after sunset having carried rock. And that is the shape of the next 40 years, decided that morning. There is a doctor in this village and the state pays him. That is not a small thing. He is a member of the crew like everybody else. He is called by a specific word that means physician. He treats the workmen and their families, and the days he spends doing it are recorded as work. 3,200 years ago, in a village of 68 houses on the state's account, What he has is honey, which genuinely does stop a wound going bad, willow, onion and garlic, castor oil, fat, resin, and a long list of things that did nothing at all. He has recipes copied onto potsherds in the same hand as everything else in this village. A remedy is just another thing you write down so you do not forget it. And beside him works somebody with a different job. His title translates roughly as controller of the scorpion goddess, a specialist in stings and bites, half practitioner, half magician, and nobody at the time saw a contradiction in that. There is a letter from one of them asking a priest to send him the ingredients he needs. He's out of supplies. He writes about it like anyone else. And what you can read off the bodies is this: spines worn through from carrying and kneeling, knees and elbows gone at 40, teeth flattened by the grit in the bread, broken bones that were set and healed and set well. These were people who were looked after and who wore out anyway. It is written into the skeleton and it cannot be argued with. And the eyes, over and over on that list from this year in red. His eyes. Men who spend their working lives in an unventilated corridor with a burning wick a hand's width from their face, breathing what it gives off, staring at a wall. There is no eye doctor in this village. There is a man who writes down in red that you could not come in. Everybody in this lane wears eyeliner. Men, women, children, every day. It is ground mineral mixed to a paste and drawn round the eye with a small stick. It is beautiful and it is also practical. It cuts the glare off white rock, and it seems to have kept some of the flies off. In a valley this bright, that is not vanity. That is equipment. And a lot of the heads under those wigs are shaved. Shaving is cleanliness here, and it is also the answer to lice, which the combs from these houses are full of. So people shave and then put on somebody else's hair for anything that matters. A good wig is expensive, kept on a stand, and looked after like a piece of furniture. There is one thing they could not fix, and it is the teeth. The grit wears the crowns flat. The pulp gets exposed. The abscess follows. The remedies for toothache in these documents are honey and resin and words. Whether anybody here ever pulled a tooth is an open question. There is one jaw from this very village that may show it, and it is the only candidate anybody has found in all of ancient Egypt. Mostly you live with it, and a lot of people died of it. What they were good at was bones, splints of wood and stiffened linen, set and bound and left. The skeletons from this valley are full of fractures that healed straight, arms, ribs, a collarbone. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it often enough to get good at it. When two people here fall out, they do not go anywhere. The court is the village. It sits in the lane or by the gate. It is made of the two foremen, the scribe, and a group of ordinary workmen, your neighbors. The men you walked up the ridge with this morning. They hear it, and they decide, and their decision holds. Women bring cases and win them. A woman here can own property. She can buy and sell it, lend grain, take somebody to court over a debt, and leave what she owns to whoever she chooses. That was not true of most places at most times. It was true in this lane. And it is written down in the ordinary paperwork of ordinary arguments. The cases are what you would expect, and that is what makes them good. Somebody borrowed a tool and it came back broken. Somebody's donkey was used for 8 days and the fee was never paid. A shirt went missing off a roof. A man says the pot he bought was not the pot he was shown. The court hears it. It is recorded. And here it still is. And when the court cannot decide, they ask the god. The statue comes out on men's shoulders and the question is put to it. Often literally 2 pot shirts on the ground. One says yes, one says no. The god moves toward one of them. That verdict is binding. It was entered in the record like any other, and people appealed it and asked again. It is easy to hear that and think of superstition sitting where the law should be. But look at what it does. 68 houses, everybody related to everybody. Nobody able to move away, and a way of ending an argument that no neighbor has to be blamed for. It was not the God who ruled against you. That matters on a street this narrow. Here is one, all the way through. A woman lends a neighbor a bronze vessel. The neighbor uses it for 2 years and then says it was a gift. She brings it to the court. The court hears both, fines for her, and orders the vessel returned plus something on top for the 2 years. It took an afternoon, and then it gets written down, and that is the part that matters. Not because anybody expected to read it again, but because writing it is what makes it binding. A verdict that is not on a pot is a conversation. A verdict on a pot is a thing your grandson can point at. Iineferti's title is Mistress of the House. It is a real title, not a courtesy. The house is her jurisdiction. The grain that comes in on ration day passes into her keeping, and she decides how it lasts the month. She runs the storage, the grinding, the baking, the brewing, the cloth, the children, and the small economy of lending and owing that keeps a lane like this standing. The linen is made at home. Flax is pulled, retted, beaten, combed, spun, then woven on a loom laid flat on the ground with pegs at the corners or standing upright against a wall. The finest of it comes out so sheer you can see the body through it. That is what a man wears to a festival. It is one of the few luxuries a family here can produce themselves. She is also the one who keeps the dead, the niche in the wall, the offering table under it, side, the bowl that gets refilled. There are particular days in the month set aside for pouring water for the ancestors. That is a household rite, not a temple one, and the person who remembers to do it is generally the person who runs the house. She has a second title, which is Singer of Hathor. That means she takes part in the worship of the goddess of music and love and drunkenness and the Western Mountain, the one who receives the dead. Women in this village held that role in numbers. She is not only somebody's wife in the record, she is in the record on her own account. She will outlive most of the people in this movement. Into her 70s without teeth, with a spine that has ground itself down, and with her sight going. And near the end, she will pay a craftsman to cut a line into a stone. Be merciful to me, because you have made me see darkness in the daytime. That is the sentence. She chose it. When a woman here sells something, she does it in her own name, and it is recorded in her own name. Not through a husband, not through a brother. There are documents from this village where a woman buys a slave girl on credit or leaves her property to some of her children and not others, and the court upholds it. And the everyday version of that power is smaller and more constant. She holds the store. She decides how much goes out today and how much waits. In a house that gets paid once a month and has to eat for 30 days, the person with the lid in her hand is the person running the household economy. Weeks after the sowing, the fields change color. It happens quickly, and it happens everywhere at once. A flat brown plain from one edge of the valley to the other turns a green so uniform it looks painted. From up on the ridge, it is a single sheet of it, running between two deserts, with the river down the middle. Now the field has to be watched. Birds come down on it in flocks, and boys are sent out with slings to keep them off. Weeds have to be pulled. Cattle have to be kept out. The animals that get in do more damage in an hour than a week of bird. And half the disputes in this valley between now and the harvest are about somebody's animals in somebody else's field. And here come the men everybody has been waiting for, and nobody is glad to see. Two of them walking a field with a rope stretched between them. 100 cubits of rope, which is exactly the width of the standard unit of land. So the rope is not measuring the field. The rope is the field, laid down again and again until the shape is used up. And this is the part that surprises people. The tax is not worked out from the harvest. It is worked out now, months early, from the area. This much land, of this quality, owes this much grain. The scribe writes the debt before a single ear exists. What happens at harvest is collection, not calculation. The number was decided while the crop was ankle high. There are categories though, and they matter. Fresh land, island land, tired land. And one that says, in as many words, land the water did not reach. That last one is the mercy in the system. It is the reason a bad flood is not simply a death sentence. Because somebody walked out here with a rope and wrote down that this corner stayed dry. The last working day of the month, the wage arrives. It comes up the hill on donkeys. Grain sacks, and behind them the fish, the vegetables, the firewood, the water, the pots. Every one of those things is somebody's entire job. There is a man whose life is bringing water up this hill. He does not live at the top of it. It is measured out in front of everybody. A wooden cylinder that holds about 19 liters. One man can lift it. 4 of those make a sack. 4 sacks of emmer and a sack and a half of barley for a working man. More for a foreman. More for the scribe. And whether the measure is heaped or struck level is worth 1/10 of your month. Which is why it is done where people can see. It comes from the great temples down on the plain. The enormous walled establishments of the dead kings, which are not really temples in the sense you are thinking. They are estates. They own land and herds and workshops and granaries. And the granaries are what feed this hill. The king's tomb is being cut, and the king's temple is paying for the men cutting it. And when it does not come, everybody knows immediately. A late delivery goes in the record the same day. There are notes from this community about supplies not arriving, about how many days it has been, about who was told. That is the fragile thing at the center of this arrangement. A village in a desert with no field and no well, entirely dependent on a cart that has to show up. Tonight, in 68 houses, the same thing happens. Somebody kneels on the floor of a back room and pours a month into a jar sunk into the ground, puts the lid on, and works out in her head how far it goes. That calculation is the real economy of this place. Not the king's tomb, the lid going back on the jar. And what a month actually looks like in a house here is this. Bread every day in several shapes. Beer every day for everybody. Onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, cucumbers. Dried fish, dates and figs. Oil for the lamp and oil for the skin. Meat at festivals and almost never otherwise. It is a monotonous diet and it is a completely adequate one. And underneath the rations there is a second economy, which is lending. There is no coin money anywhere in this world, so value is counted in weights of copper that mostly never move, and things get swapped against that number. A stool for a basket of grain, a goat for a linen sheet, written down on a pot in front of a witness. The unit everybody counts in is a weight of copper, and most of the copper never moves. You agree a stool is worth so much, and a basket of grain is worth so much, and you settle the difference in something else entirely. It is barter with an agreed scale behind it, which is most of what money ever was. Down in the king's corridor, the cutting has stopped in the first chamber. Something else has started. Plasterers go in first and skim the rough limestone smooth. Then a man with a red brush lays out the whole design in outline freehand on a grid. Figures, texts, registers, hundreds of square meters of it planned in his head before he touches the wall. Then the color, red and yellow ochre out of the ground, black from soot, white from chalk and gypsum, and the blue, which is the expensive one. It is the first artificial pigment anybody on earth ever made, cooked in a workshop out of sand, lime, and copper, and ground to a powder. It has held its color for 3,000 years in the dark. These men do this for the king, on schedule, for a wage. And then on their 2 days off they walk down the hill and do exactly the same work again. On their own tombs, for nothing. The same hands, the same pigments, sometimes literally the same leftover material. The finest small tombs in Egypt were made by professionals moonlighting on themselves, and they helped each other. A man who was a painter painted his neighbor's chapel. A man who was a sculptor cut his neighbor's door. Everyone in this lane is in everyone else's tomb in the sense that they made them. Go into any of these chambers, and what you are looking at is the work of the man 3 doors down. Sennedjem's chamber is nearly done. The vault is a deep yellow, the way the good ones are. The registers run around all 4 walls. There is a scene of the funeral. There are the gods who receive him. There is the weighing of what he did with his life, and on the east wall, filling it, that green field with the barley over their heads. The colors all have somewhere they come from. The reds and yellows are ochres, dug out of the desert not far from here. The white is chalk and gypsum. The black is soot off a lamp, which means the light they worked by also supplied one of the colors they worked with. The blue is the one that had to be invented. Sand, lime, a copper compound, and natron cooked together at a heat you have to hold steady for hours, then ground down. Somebody worked that out more than 1,000 years before this, and every blue on every wall in Egypt comes out of that recipe. The green is not green anymore. It has gone pale at the tips and then further down. The whole plain is turning the color of the desert it is standing in. The stems are stiffening. The heads are heavy enough now to bend, and the wind coming off the eastern hills in the afternoon has changed. Everybody has noticed. Farmers walk out and take a head between finger and thumb and roll it. Then they look at what comes off in their palm. Too soon, and you lose it in the threshing. Too late, and it shatters in the field, and the birds get it off the ground. There is a window. Everybody in the valley is watching the same window, and it opens for all of them at once. In the villages, tools are coming out, and the sickle is not what you are imagining. It is a curved piece of wood with a groove cut down its inside edge. Into that groove is set a row of short flint blades held with a cement of mud and glue. Bronze exists. Bronze is expensive, and it is elsewhere. What cuts the harvest of Egypt is stone. And it is getting hot, not the pleasant end of hot. The stone in the valley starts holding the heat overnight. The men going over the ridge are already moving before first light to get the walk done. The good months are over. What is coming is 4 months of the sun doing whatever it likes to this valley. And in a chamber under the hill, the east wall is finished. An old man is standing in a green field with a plough, in a pleated linen kilt and a wig. On a wall he paved for himself. Out on the plain, the real fields are going gold and cracking. In a few weeks men will be in them from dawn with stone-toothed sickles. He is not going to be one of them. He never was. By now the air over the plain has started to bend. You can see it from up on the ridge. The far edge of the valley wobbling, the palms doubling and coming apart. The temperature climbs past what a body has any business standing in, and it will keep climbing for 3 more months. This is the part of the year that everything else is arranged around. The men going over the ridge leave earlier and earlier. By the time the sun is properly up, they need to be inside the rock. The rock is the only cool place left. The corridor stays reasonable all day. Outside, the limestone gets hot enough that you would not put a hand flat on it. And the walk back down at dusk is the worst part of the shift. Down on the plain, everything is ready at once. Whole fields the color of straw, heads bent over, stems dry enough to snap. The river is low again and getting lower, back to the thin brown thread it was when this year started. And every household in the valley now has a small number of days to get a year's food off the ground and under a roof. Water becomes the first thing anybody thinks about in the morning and the last at night. In the village on the hill, there still is none. So the donkeys go down and come back all day, and the jars by the north gate empty faster than they did in winter. A man's whole occupation is walking water up a hill that gets hotter every week. And before a single field is cut, the whole valley stops for a day. The reaping does not start when a farmer decides it starts. It starts when the moon says so. And when the god responsible for things growing has been carried out of his temple and shown the ripe fields. That happens now, on the new moon of the first month. The wind here has a direction and a personality. It comes down the valley from the north most of the year, which is why boats can sail upstream against the current and drift back down with it. The sign the scribes drew for wind is a sail. In a country with one river, the weather and the road are the same thing. And then there is the other wind, the one out of the south in spring, which arrives hot and full of sand and closes everything down for a day or two at a time. It gets into the grain, into the eyes, into the lungs. When it comes, there is no work worth doing, and everybody knows it. His name is Min, and he's the oldest kind of god there is. He is fertility and harvest and the raw fact of things reproducing. Is carried out of the temple on a platform on men's shoulders with a canopy over him and enormous fans on either side. The king walks in front, not a priest standing in for the king. Where possible, the king. And what happens at the center of it is small and very old. The king cuts a sheaf. One sheaf with a sickle in front of everybody, and it is offered. That is the whole hinge of the ceremony. A man with a title cutting a handful of grain so that 100,000 people can start cutting theirs. Birds are released into the air, sent to the four directions to carry the news. There is a white bull in the procession. There are statues of ancestors carried along behind. And there is a lot about this ceremony that is genuinely uncertain. The fullest picture we have of it was carved 60 or 70 years after this by a later king. And the reason it lands where it lands is the moon. This festival does not sit on a fixed day of the civil calendar. It moves with the new moon. And the great festival that comes after it moves with the next new moon, 1 month later. The almanac on the wall drifts a day every 4 years. The moon does not drift. So the moon is what the important things hang on. The next morning, the valley starts cutting. Not one field, all of them. From the water's edge to the desert margin, in both directions, as far as anyone can see. Everybody who has a field is standing in it before the sun has cleared the eastern hills. And they will not stop in any real sense for about a month. The plant carried in this festival is a long green one on a pole, and it is the god's own. It is bound up, carried in the procession, and afterwards the pieces are worth having. Any object that has been near a god today goes home with somebody tonight and ends up in a niche in a wall. The grip is the same everywhere. Left hand into the standing stalks, gather a fistful, pull it toward you. Right hand brings the sickle across underneath, and they cut high, right below the heads, leaving most of the straw standing in the field. What comes away in the hand is almost all grain and hardly any stem. It is bent work. You are folded over from the waist for hours in full sun, with your hand closing on stalks a few thousand times a day. Every skeleton in this valley with worn lower vertebrae got them somewhere. For most people out here, this is where. It is the single most physically expensive month of the Egyptian year. Behind the line of men, the ground is not left alone. Women and children come along the cut rows picking up what fell, the ears that dropped, the ones that missed the basket. On some fields that is a job you are paid for. On others it is simply what the poorest people in the village are allowed to do. Both of those are true at once in the same valley. It goes out of a field in baskets and in big rope nets slung on a pole between two men. Then on to donkeys. Never anything larger because there is nothing larger. And it goes to a flat piece of ground near the village, packed hard, where it will be piled up and waited on. Where exactly that ground was and whether it belonged to everybody is something nobody can tell you for certain. And the men from the hill are not in any of this. They went over the ridge this morning like every other morning. They will hear about the harvest and eat it and be paid in it. They will be recorded as absent on the days there is a festival for it. But they have not touched the sickle. Their grain arrives on a donkey with somebody else's dust on it. Almost nobody out here owns the field they are standing in. The land belongs to the crown, or to a temple, or to an official, and the people cutting it hold it as tenants and hand over the assessed share. What a household actually owns is its labor, its tools, and whatever is left after the scribe has been. The gangs are family plus whoever is hired. Men cut, women and children glean and carry, and somebody keeps the water coming, because in this heat, that is a full job by itself. A field is not a solitary place at harvest. It is 40 people who mostly know each other working fast for about a month, and it does not stop when it gets hot, because it cannot. The window is the window. There are notes from this valley about men working through the middle of the day at harvest, which nobody does at any other time of year. For about 4 weeks, the sensible rules about heat get suspended by arithmetic. There is a second harvest going on at the same time, and it is nothing like the first. In the walled gardens, the grapes come in. They are picked into flat baskets by hand, in the shade, by people standing up. After a month bent over a wheat field, this is the job everybody wants. Then they are trodden. Four or five men in a low vat, holding onto ropes hung from a frame above so they do not go over, walking on the spot. The juice runs out of a spout at the bottom into jars. And the jars get labeled in ink, the year, the estate it came from, and the name of the man responsible for it. Wine here is signed. The grain is spread out in a wide circle on packed ground. Then cattle are driven onto it and walked round and round. That is the whole technique. Hooves. Not a sledge with flints in it. That is another country. Here it is a line of animals, roped side by side, going in circles over a bed of dry ears until the grain comes free of the husk. Men stand round the edge with wooden forks. They throw the outside of the pile back under the animals as it works its way out. It is hot. It is loud. And the air is entirely dust. This is where a good part of the grit in everybody's bread comes from. There is nothing to be done about that, and nobody is trying. And there is a song for it. We have the words because a man had them carved on the wall of his tomb, although he lived 200 years before this, and 80 kilometers upriver. Thresh for yourselves, oxen. Straw to eat, barley for your masters. Give yourselves no rest, it is cool today. Somebody thought that was worth keeping forever. So, here it still is. Then it is thrown into the air. 2 wooden scoops, one in each hand, tossing the mixture up. The wind takes the light chaff away and the heavy grain falls back down. The people doing it have cloth wrapped over their hair against the dust. You can only do it when there is wind, which is why they work the late afternoon when it comes off the hills. Then it is sieved in wide, flat reed sieves until what is on the mat is clean grain and nothing else. It has taken a year, a flood, a plough, a river's worth of mud, and a month of the hardest work in the country. Now it is a pile of small pale seeds on the ground, and it belongs to somebody. And there is a man walking over to find out how much of it is his. Getting it from the threshing floor to the granary is where things go missing. Donkeys, drivers, a distance, and a commodity that is measured by volume and pores. There are documents about exactly this, shortfalls between what left and what arrived, and arguments about whether it was theft or the sacks. So the sacks get sealed. A lump of wet clay pressed with a mark at the neck of the sack, and if it arrives broken, somebody has to explain. It is the same technology as sealing a tomb, used on a bag of wheat, by people who understood perfectly that both are about somebody not helping themselves. He does not touch the grain, so that is worth watching. The laborers fill the measure. Another man strikes it level. Somebody else carries it to the sack, and the scribe stands to one side with a roll and a brush and writes down what happened. The power in this scene is not in the bucket. It is in the roll. The unit a man actually lifts holds about 19 liters. 4 of those make a sack, and the sack is about 77 liters. It is smaller than the sack his great-grandfather used. At some point, somebody made it smaller by exactly a fifth, and nobody wrote down when or why. And whether the measure is heaped or struck flat is worth a tenth of it. But the amount he owes was not decided here, and it was not decided today. It was decided months ago out in a green field with a rope. So much land of such a quality owes this. The harvest does not change the number. It only decides whether you can pay it. A bad year does not lower the debt. It lowers what you have left after. There is room to argue though, and people argue. There are categories that let a number come down. There is the classification of land that means the water did not get here this year. And there is the fact that the man with the roll lives in this valley too and has to walk past your house afterwards. How much of the written number was ever really collected is a live question. What is collected goes into buildings that look like nothing else in the valley. Rows of tall mud brick domes, whitewashed, standing in a walled yard. A filling hole at the top, a drawing hole at the bottom. Men go up a ramp with a sack on their shoulder and pour it in through the roof. That is the treasury of Egypt. See, there is no other kind. Inside those domes there is no floor and no shelf. The grain goes in through a hole in the roof and comes out through a hole at the bottom. Which means the oldest grain sits at the bottom and comes out first. That is not sophistication. That is the shape of the building doing the accounting for you. A scribe is not born into it, and he does not stay put. He starts as somebody's boy carrying a pallet, and if he is good, he ends up with a title, a house, and the ability to write a letter to a man who runs a province. It is the only ladder in this valley, and it is made of writing. And at the end of the day, the tallies go up the chain. Field to floor, floor to granary, granary to the temple's accounts, temple to the vizier. Every step is a man with a brush copying somebody else's number onto a bigger document. The whole system is people writing down what other people wrote down. And when a man cannot pay, the number does not go away, it carries. It follows him into next year, on top of next year's, and the year after that. And there are households in this valley carrying grain debts older than their children. There were ways out, there were exemptions, but the roll remembers, and the roll is the thing that outlasts everybody, so people lend to each other. That is what the second economy in this valley is for. A neighbor puts grain across a wall now and takes it back after next harvest with something on top. It is not charity and it is not banking. It is 68 houses that all know they might be the ones asking next year. The granaries belong to a building on the plain that is not what you would call a temple. It has pylons and courts and columns, and there are gods in it. But behind and around it there are storerooms, workshops, offices, herds, and a mud brick perimeter you could not throw a stone across. It is a working estate with a sanctuary at the front of it. It is called the House of Millions of Years. Its job is to keep a dead king alive by keeping his name spoken and his offerings coming. To fund that, it owns land and workers and the grain that comes off that land and the people who make things out of it. The theology and the accounting are the same building. Nobody there thought that was strange. And it is enormous. A seated statue of the king in the first court that a person standing at its foot cannot reach the ankle of. Painted columns. Walls covered in the king's battles, in color. His name cut so deep into the stone that nobody could ever plaster it over and put their own there. He is thinking about a very long time from now. From here, on a schedule, sacks leave and go up a hill to 68 houses. The men cutting this king's tomb are fed by this king's temple, out of grain grown on this king's land, measured by this king's scribes. It is a closed circle, and it works for as long as somebody keeps writing things down and somebody else keeps showing up. In about 3,000 years, most of this will be gone. The stone front will come down. The Colossus will be lying on its side in pieces. Travelers will stand in the rubble and write poems about how nothing lasts. But not now. Right now it is new, it is painted, the flags are up, and the granaries behind it are being filled. It is not only grain in there. Behind the sanctuary there are workshops making everything the establishment needs, and quite a lot it does not. Pottery, linen, sandals, beer, bread, furniture, faience. A memorial temple in this reign is a town with a god at the front of it, and a few thousand people work in it. And it keeps its own archive. Who was owed what, who delivered, who did not, in rooms of rolled papyrus that somebody had to be able to find things in. The reason we know how much a workman got paid in this century is that a temple accountant 3,000 years ago was tidy. In the village, the lane is empty by mid-morning and stays empty. The heat comes off the walls on both sides and sits in the middle with nowhere to go. Everybody who is not up on the ridge is inside, in the second room, where the ceiling is high and there is a vent in the wall and it is bearable. The day gets lived at the two ends. People sleep in the afternoon, not as a luxury, as the only sensible thing to do with those hours. Children sleep on the floor of the back room where the stone is coolest. And at night, everybody's on the roof, all 68 houses at once. Which means that on a summer night, this village is a field of people lying in the open under the same sky. And that sky is worth stopping on. No street light anywhere on earth. A moon and then no moon. A band of light across the middle of it that they thought of as water, with the stars as a country you travel through after you die. Every person lying on these roofs has been told since they were small that they are looking at where they are going. In the valley, the work does not stop for the season. The corridor is cooled, the wicks are counted, the baskets go out. But the list from this year shows what the summer does to a workforce. Absences cluster, illness climbs. Men who were fine in the cool months are on the register in red. And the man writing it down does not editorialize. He just writes the reason. There is a note in the record from this community about 4 days when a man did not come. He was looking after somebody who was ill. Not a relative, as far as anybody can tell. Just a man from the crew, sitting in a room with another man from the crew for 4 days. While the scribe wrote down where he was and why. The crew has its own festivals, and they are small and specific and nothing to do with the temples. There is a note from this village about a feast held for a god of craftsmen, held in front of the tomb they were cutting. Not in a sanctuary, on the working ground at the mouth of the corridor with beer. And on one particular day of the month, they drink to the king. The anniversary of the day he came to the throne, marked in this village's own calendar, in this reign, by these men. 40 years of the same man on the throne. Most of the people raising a cup have never known anybody else being king. In the worst weeks, the water on the ridge gets counted like grain. So many jars up, so many empty by evening, and a note when it runs short. There is a real number of days in these records where the entry is simply that the water did not come, and everything else that day happened around that fact, and the ones who go down come home barely able to talk. There is a particular exhaustion in these records that is not illness and is not laziness and gets its own note. A man is not sick. A man has been in a rock corridor since before dawn in the hottest month of the year, and that is all. One lunar month after the harvest opened, the moon goes dark and comes back. That is the signal for the largest thing that happens on this side of the river all year. It is called the beautiful Festival of the Valley. And the word valley in that name means this one. The dry side, the cemetery side, tide, where everybody's dead people are. In the morning, the god comes out of the great temple across the river. Not a priest carrying a symbol. The statue itself in a portable boat on poles, on the shoulders of men in white, and in this rain he does not go alone. His wife and his son come too, each in their own boat. That is new. 3 generations ago, he crossed by himself. They go down to the water. The whole thing is loaded onto a river barge of cedar covered in gold, with rams' heads on the bow and the stern, towed across by the royal ship with a flotilla around it. And here is the thing that is specific to this century. The crossing itself is what people started putting on their walls. Before this rain, they painted the boat and the party. Now they paint the river. On this side, it goes up the canal to a landing at the desert edge. Then into the king's own temple, the one with the granaries behind it. The statues go into the innermost room, and there, alongside the great gods, they honor a king who has been dead 2.5 centuries. The personal god of the village on the hill. And what comes back out to the people is flowers. Enormous tied bundles of papyrus and lotus, some of them as tall as a man. They have been in the presence of the god, and they are handed out to the crowd. The Egyptian word for that kind of bouquet sounds exactly like their word for life. Nobody involved considered that a coincidence. The barge does not sail. It gets towed by a ship with a crew, against or across the current, with smaller boats around it, keeping it off the shallows. There are men doing hard physical work at the center of that image, and they are not in a single one of the paintings. The paintings only show the gold. And on the west bank, the god is carried through a gate and disappears, and that is the last most people see of him for 2 days. What happens inside is closed. The crowd's part of this festival is the arrival and the departure, and the flowers, and the night in between when they are not at the temple at all. Everybody on the east bank spends this day crossing a river to reach their dead. The people on the hill do not. Their tombs are 200 meters up the slope behind their own houses. They pick up the food and the beer and the flour. They walk uphill for 10 minutes, and they are there. The chapel above the tomb is not a sealed thing. It is a room with a door meant to be entered, with a little courtyard in front of it and a low table for offerings. Bread goes down, beer goes down. The flowers go against the wall. And then the family sits down in the courtyard of their own dead relative and has dinner there. And they stay all night with lamps, eating and drinking and singing in the cemetery. Next to the door of the room where their father is, there is a note from this community about a feast that ran 4 days with more than 100 people, women and children included, and a lot of drink. That is not a solemn vigil. That is a family party in a graveyard. And it was the point. Somebody goes inside with a lamp. The chapel walls are painted with the family. The dead man, his wife, his sons and daughters, all named, all facing an offering table. The point of writing the names was that somebody would come in and read them out loud. That is what is happening now. Somebody is standing in a small painted room saying her father's name. In the morning, they go down again, and the god goes back across the river. There is a word in the village calendar for this day that means simply the crossing. It is marked as a rest day. Everybody who was up on that hill last night is on the register as not at work. And the reason written beside their name is that they were with their dead. And there is something else that came out of this village. Love poems. Almost every love poem that survives from ancient Egypt was copied out in this community in these 2 centuries on broken pots and scraps of papyrus. Not from a palace, not from a temple, from a lane of tomb workers in the desert. They are about the ordinary things, not being able to eat, pretending to be ill so somebody will come and visit, watching a door, calling the other person my brother or my sister, which is what you called somebody you were in love with. 3,000 years, and the complaint has not changed at all. There is a formula for what you say, and everybody knows it. An offering which the king gives, bread and beer, cattle and fowl, everything good and pure on which a god lives, for the spirit of, and then the name. It is on every one of these chapel walls. It is the sentence the whole room is built around. The ID, and you pour water. That is the oldest part of it and the simplest. A jar tipped out onto the ground in front of the chapel, which is the thing people in this valley did for their dead on set days of every month, not only at the festival. Somebody in this village does that tonight and will do it again in 9 days. After the festival, the year has very little left in it. The fields are stubble, threshing floors are swept, and the river has been going down since the harvest started. It is nearly back to where you first saw it. A narrow brown channel between wide, dry banks with sandbanks in the middle that were not there in the spring. Boats start having trouble. The channel narrows and shifts, and the sandbanks move. The men who move things up and down this river for a living spend these weeks pulling off bars and picking their way. Everything heavy that has to be shipped anywhere gets shipped when the water is high. Right now the river is barely a road. People watch it now the way you would watch a bank balance. This is the bottom. After the bottom comes the rise. And the difference between a good rise and a bad one is the difference between next year being ordinary and next year being a catastrophe. There is no ceremony for this part. Just men going down to the water and looking at it. In the houses, the year's food is now in jars on the floor and baskets on the roof. It has to last 12 months. Everything from here is management. How much bread a day? How much goes to beer? What gets lent to a neighbor and what that obligates them to? Half the small arguments this village will have next year start with a jar somebody opened too early. And then, for a few weeks, the valley does very little. It is too hot to do anything, and there is nothing that needs doing. The fields are empty. The work on the hill goes on, because the work on the hill always goes on. Egypt, in the last month of its year, is a country holding still and waiting for a river. And then the floors get swept and the year's tools get put away. Sickles get their flints checked and go into a basket. The winnowing scoops go under a roof. The threshing floor gets raked flat and left, and for 4 months it is a hard round patch of nothing that children use as a place to play. At night, the desert side of this valley belongs to something else. Jackals come down along the wadi edges after dark, and you hear them from the roofs, and everybody knows the sound. The god who guards cemeteries has the head of one. That is not a coincidence, and nobody living here needed it explained. And there are men awake on the path all night, every night. doorkeepers, guardians with the keys to the tools, and 8 police assigned to the tomb. Nothing is happening. Nothing has ever happened. They sit on the ridge in the dark next to a small fire and keep the road between the village and the king's corridor from being empty. Under the hill, the last wall of a small room gets its last color. The painter puts his brush in a bowl and steps back with the lamp, which is what you do. He looks at the whole thing at once for the first time. 4 walls and the vault, painted by his neighbors, in a room the size of a large bedroom, cut by hand out of solid rock. On one wall there is a funeral. Men dragging a shrine on a sledge. Women with their arms up. The priest in the leopard skin, and the mummy stood upright at the door of the tomb, for the right where they touch its mouth so it can eat and speak again. This is a picture, painted in advance, of a day that has not happened yet. In the room where it will end, on another there is a set of scales, a heart on one side and a feather on the other, a row of gods watching, and a creature sitting to one side, waiting to see how it comes out. Every workman in this village had this on his wall. The judgment is not about how much you achieve. It is a list of specific things you say you did not do. I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not made anyone cry. I have not taken milk from a child's mouth. I have not held back water when it should have flowed to my neighbor's field. That last one is on the list. In a country that lives off a river, letting water past your own land was a moral act. And they wrote it down as one. And on the east wall, filling it from the floor to the vault, that green country. Water channels in blue, barley higher than the people standing in it. Date palms along the edges. An old man behind a plough, and a woman walking behind him. The whole thing so lush it is almost showing off. It is the biggest, brightest, most carefully made image in the room. And the room is not for one person. It is for a family over 3 generations, added to as people die. His wife will be in here, sons, daughters, grandchildren, 2 babies in wooden boxes. This is not a monument to a man. It is a room that a household moves into gradually over about 40 years. And every figure on these walls gets a name written beside it. That is the working part of the decoration. A painted person without a name is decoration. A painted person with a name is somebody who can be spoken to out loud by whoever walks in with bread on a festival day. The names are the machinery. Look up. The ceiling of a chamber like this is often not a scene at all, but a pattern, spirals, rosettes, a checker of color, or a plain deep yellow. There are ceilings on this hillside painted like a woven mat. Because a woven mat is what would be over your head if you were lying in a room at home. And nothing in here is signed. Not the painter, not the dressman, not the men who cut it. In a village where every man had a mark he scratched on his own jars, nobody put a mark on this. The room belongs to the person going into it, and the people who made it did not consider that a question. In the village, the last month of the year is a month of finishing things. Debts get settled before the year turns over. Nobody wants to carry an argument across into the new one. The court hears more cases than usual. People pay back what they borrowed at harvest. The lane is full of small transactions that are all really about the same thing. Houses get cleaned out. Old jars are emptied and scoured and put back. Roofs get repaired. The niche in the wall gets a new bowl, and there are days set in the month, fixed ones, for pouring water for the dead of the household. So, before the year ends, in every one of these houses, somebody kneels down in front of a small pale face in the wall and does that, and the scribe closes his year. All those small notes on broken pots, who worked, who was sick, what came in, what went out, get pulled together onto larger documents. The list from this year, the one with 40 names and the reasons in red, is exactly this. Somebody sat down at the end of a year with a pile of scraps and made one clean copy of everything that happened. And people start looking south. There is nothing to see yet. The river is at the bottom and it will stay there a little longer, but somewhere up beyond the frontier the water is already coming. Word of it will arrive one day ahead of the water itself, and after that the whole thing starts again. Everybody on this bank knows that. It has never not happened, except that the year does not end tomorrow. Between the last day of this month and the first day of the next one, there are 5 days that belong to neither. 5 days that are not in any month, that the calendar hands over reluctantly, and that a scribe will sometimes leave out of the record entirely, as if that stretch of time had not occurred. There is one house in this lane with a library in it, the scribe's. Not a room of shelves, a chest with rolls in it that he collected over a working life and that his family kept after him. Literature, hymns, a manual for interpreting dreams written in red and black, and on the back of that dream manual, in his own hand, he copied out the long poem about the king's great battle. And then, underneath it, a copy of a letter he had written himself to the man who ran the whole province. A workman's son in a desert village, keeping his own correspondence on the back of a book about dreams. The 5 days have a reputation, and people prepare. Amulets get made. Small pieces of linen with drawings on them, folded, tied on a cord, worn round the neck. Not by the nervous, by everybody. There are papyri from these exact years, with the spells written out and instructions for what to draw and how to tie it. They go on the children first. A small folded thing on a string tied at the back of the neck, meant to keep off something that is understood to be moving around out there in the last week of the year. The child does not know what it is for. The mother does. And in 3,000 years, this will not have changed all that much. In the temples, the rite for these days is aimed at the particular goddess, the dangerous one, the lioness, the one who was sent out to destroy people and had to be got drunk to stop her. The ceremony is called, in plain language, appeasing her. And the reason it happens now is that her messengers are understood to go out in the last days of the year. They are not choosy, and people carry torches, not for light, or not only for light. Fire moved through a doorway, through a room, round a house at the turn of the year. It is the same instinct that has people lighting things on the shortest night of the year everywhere else on earth. Arrived at independently for their own reasons on the banks of a different river. And then the last day of the last month is over and the calendar runs out. Tomorrow is not the first of anything. Tomorrow is the first of 5 days that were left over when the world was being arranged. That had to be put somewhere, and this is where they were put. This morning is not the first of a month. Chain, there is no month. The 12 are used up and the next year has not started, and in the gap the Egyptians put 5 days that belong to nothing. They call them straightforwardly the ones that are on top of the year, 5 days sitting above the calendar, attached to neither side of it. They exist because of arithmetic. The year they built has 12 months of 30 days, and that comes to 360. The real year is longer than that, so 5 days had to go somewhere. They did not put them inside a month. They put them outside, in a small space of their own, and gave them a name that says exactly what they are. And they were understood to be dangerous, not unlucky in a vague way. Specifically dangerous in a way people took practical steps about. This is when the messengers of the lioness goddess are out. This is when the amulets go round the children's necks. And this is when a lot of people in this valley simply stay in and do very little on purpose. There are papyri from these exact decades that are nothing but protection for this week. Spells against what they called, plainly, the robbers of the 5 days. Instructions for what to draw, on what and how to tie it. They are not the writings of frightened cranks. They are ordinary household documents, in ordinary handwriting, about a specific week. And here is the thing that turns this from superstition into something stranger. The scribes, the same men who write down every wick and every absence and every sack of grain, sometimes leave these 5 days out of the record entirely. They IDK nothing, as if that week had not taken place at all. Think about what that means in a village like this one. Everything here runs on the record. Who came, what was delivered, what is owed. And for 5 days a year, the record simply stops and then starts again on the far side. And the gap is not explained because to them it is not a gap. Those days were never in the year. So, what people do with them is mostly nothing, on purpose. You do not begin things in these days. You do not start a journey, or open a new jar, or move house. You finish what is already finished and you keep the children close. And in 5 days the world starts up again with a number attached to it. Each of the 5 days is a birthday. On the first, the god who is killed and comes back. Osiris, the one they buried in a field at the other end of this year when the water was going down. He gets the first of the days that do not exist, which is either a very good joke or a very good piece of design, and there is no way now to ask. The second day is his son. The third is his brother who killed him, and that one gets a birthday too, and offerings. He is dangerous, and the way you handle dangerous things here is not to ignore them. The fourth is his wife, the one who put him back together. And the fifth is her sister who helped. And in this century, it is the 5th day that seems to carry the most weight. A household papyrus from these very decades calls the god born on it the child in the nest, and puts her against the door of the new year. That changes later. 1,000 years from now, the 4th will be the important one, because the goddess born on it becomes enormous. But not yet. Right now, the last of the 5 is the one that matters. It is the one that stands against the door of the new year. There is a story about how the days got made, involving a god winning them at a board game against the moon. It is a good story, and it is not from here. It was written down more than 1,000 years after this by a Greek, and it is the version everybody knows. What these people have is simpler. 5 births, 5 days. Handle with care. Nobody goes over the ridge this week. There is nothing to cut and nothing to record. The crew is at home in a village quieter than at any other point in the year, in the hottest weather it gets. And in one of these houses this week, something is being made ready that has been in preparation for a very long time. The household version of all this is small. A bowl put out, a lamp lit at the niche in the wall, a name said. There is no priest involved and no temple involved, and the god being addressed on the third evening is the one who murdered his brother. And he gets his bowl like everybody else. And the doorways get something too. A knotted cord, a scrap of inscribed linen, a drawn sign, put up on the first of the 5 days and taken down after. It is not fear exactly. It is the same instinct as locking a door you have never had trouble with, in a week when everybody has agreed the locks matter. Sennedjem has died. We do not know when or how old he was. His body has never been examined. It was found, it was moved, it was displayed, and nobody has ever put it through the machines that would tell us. He is one of the best known men of his century, and we do not know what he died of or how long he lasted. He is taken up the hill on a sledge, not far. The tombs are 200 meters above the houses, which is the whole strangeness of this place. His neighbors pull it. His neighbors are the men he worked beside for 50 years, and they are also, professionally, the people who do this. The funeral is being conducted by the crew. At the door of the tomb, they stand the coffin upright. A man in a leopard skin touches its mouth with a small tool. This is the rite that gives it back the ability to eat, to drink, to speak, to breathe. Without it, everything else in that chamber is furniture. With it, the man in the box can use what has been put in there with him. And then they carry the household in, not replicas. The actual things, his bed, a stool, the chair his wife sat in, boxes, jars, food, flowers, his working tool. When this room is opened again, 3,000 years from now, what will be standing in it is a family's furniture, taken out of a house on a lane a few hundred meters downhill. Then the door is shut and sealed with wet clay. The seal is pressed with a shape, a jackal's head, the animal that looks after cemeteries. Somebody's dung goes into that clay. It dries in the dark. And it will still be there unbroken on a January morning in 1886, when 4 men from the village down the hill dig through and find it. There are women at the front of the procession with their arms above their heads and dust on their hair. Some of them are family. Some of them are doing a job. Grief here is performed as well as felt, out loud, in public, on the way up a hill, and nobody in this century saw a contradiction in that either. And there has been a lot of work before this. 70 days of it, in a workshop somewhere down on the plain, where a body is dried in salt and packed and wrapped in linen with small objects laid between the layers. It is a trade like any other trade in this valley. Somebody does it for a living and gets paid in grain. Some things go into the room in their own containers. The parts of the body that were taken out during those 70 days are wrapped and kept in 4 jars with 4 lids, set together in a low chest at the foot of the coffins. Everything that was him goes in. That is the whole logic of it. And flowers. Real ones, cut that week, laid over the coffins and across the small boxes. Somebody chose them in the hottest month of the year and carried them up a hill in the afternoon. 3,000 years later, they are still lying where they were put, dry and brown and entirely recognizable. The chamber is small. You could cross it in 4 steps. The vault above is deep yellow and every surface is painted. There are 20 people in here across 3 generations. His wife, his sons, his daughters, their children, 2 babies in wooden boxes. The babies were buried with flowers laid on them. Somebody chose those and carried them up the hill. Against the wall is the furniture from the house. A bed with worn joints, a stool, boxes with things in them, and his tools, the actual ones, the ones he held for 50 years in a corridor by lamplight. He took his chisels. Whatever he expected to be doing next, he did not expect to be doing it empty-handed. And there are small figures. Little wrapped human shapes, about the length of a hand, made of wood and painted, with a name written down the front. About a dozen of them per person here, not hundreds. That comes centuries later, when people started burying one for every day of the year. Here it is, a dozen. But a dozen of what? Written on each one is a spell, and the spell is a set of instructions. It says, if I am called up to do work in the next world, you answer for me. And then it lists exactly what work it means. To cultivate the fields, to water the banks, to carry sand from the east to the west. Say, here I am, and go instead of me. Read that again, because it is the whole thing. Cultivate the fields, water the banks, carry sand from east to west. That is not a description of paradise. That is the list of jobs the state could call a man out to do in his own lifetime. The levy, the summons, the work you cannot say no to. And they expected it to follow them. Somebody made the coffins, and it was somebody here. There are carpenters on this crew, and they build the boxes for their own neighbors, out of imported timber if the family can afford it, and local wood pieced together if not. The coffins in this room are furniture made by men who lived 4 doors away. And then somebody painted them. Same hands, same pigments, same recipes as the king's corridor. A man who spends his week making a royal wall glow spends his rest day painting his neighbor's coffin. And it is the same quality of work because it is the same person and he does not have a second standard. That is what the next world looked like from inside this village. Not a garden where nothing is asked of you. A place with fields and canals in it, run by somebody, where names get called and people are expected to turn up. They believed there was a roll call on the other side, so they brought substitutes. And now think about who was lying in this room. A man who spent 50 years on a list, whose attendance was written down every single day by another man with a brush in black, whose absences were written in red above the date with the reason beside them. His eyes, the scorpion, brewing beer. His whole working life is a column of somebody else's handwriting. So he brought 12 wooden men to answer for him. That is not a superstition. That is a man who has been called up his entire life, making arrangements. See, he knows exactly how this works. Somebody reads out a name, and somebody has to be standing there. He has arranged for someone to be standing there. And on another wall of the same room there is that balance, with the heart and the feather, and a list of things he says he did not do. I did not steal. I did not make anyone cry. I did not hold back water that should have gone to my neighbor's field. A man is defending his life on one wall and arranging cover for his next one on another. And then you turn around and there is the east wall, bigger than anything else in here, brighter. And it shows the same thing, fields and canals and grain. That in this one, he is the one doing the work. And there is not a single small wooden figure anywhere in it. And notice what the spell does not say. It does not say, I will not have to work. It says somebody else will do it. That is a very particular kind of hope, and it belongs to people who have never once imagined a world where nobody is called. They did not ask for the role to be abolished. They asked to be excused. There is one more detail, and it is the one that stays with me. Each of those figures has a name written on it, his name, so the thing standing in for him at the roll call is not a generic servant. It is a small wooden copy of himself, carrying his own name, ready to answer to it. And there is a version of the roll call that has nothing to do with the next world. It is the one that has been happening every 10 days for 50 years, at the mouth of a corridor, at first light, with a man holding a sherd. His name got called, he answered. Somebody wrote it down. That is the shape of his life, and he knew it. The Egyptians called it the Field of Reeds, and its twin name is the Field of Offerings. It is what you get to after the balance comes out right. And it is not a palace, and it is not a garden of rest. It is farmland, canals of blue water in straight lines, islands between them, barley higher than a person, date palms along the edges. In the middle of it there is a man behind a plough with a pair of cattle and a woman walking behind him. In another register he is cutting grain with a sickle. In another they are pulling flax. And in another, they are sitting down, facing each other, at a table with food on it in the shade. Having finished, and now look at what he is wearing to do it. A kilt of fine pleated linen, a collar, a wig. This is not work clothing. Nobody has ever plowed the field dressed like that in the history of the world. He is not painted as a farmer. He is painted as a man of standing, out on his own land, doing something he has chosen to do. So the two farms are not the same farm. One of them is the levee, the thing the wooden men are for, the summons you send a substitute to. The other is this. And you can tell they were not the same, because in scenes like this one there are no substitutes. He is doing it himself in his good clothes, and he is not being counted by anybody. That is the answer as far as there is one. He did not want to be a farmer. He wanted a field. There is a difference. Everybody in this valley understood it perfectly. And it is the difference between the land you are called out to work and the land that is yours. Getting there is not automatic. There is water to cross and the ferryman is difficult. The spells that people wrote out for this are essentially an examination. He asks you the name of the boat, the name of the mast, the name of the mooring post, and you have to know all of them or he does not take you. So the afterlife these people were preparing for is a place with an entrance procedure. Questions and correct answers and paperwork and a man at a boat who can turn you away. They did not imagine somewhere without administration. They imagined somewhere with better administration. And the geography of the place is a copy of this one. Canals in straight lines, islands between them, a river running through it, and fields laid out in the shapes a surveyor would recognize. They did not imagine somewhere unlike Egypt. They imagined Egypt with the water always exactly right. Which is, when you think about it, a modest request. Not to be a god, not to be a king, to have the flood come at the right height, and the crop come up, and a table with somebody at the other side of it. This whole wall is a man asking for an ordinary good year, permanently. He never owned anything you could stand on. The house on the lane belonged to the crew. You lived in it because of the job, and you could not sell it. And if your son did not get your place, the house went to somebody else's family. The hut on the ridge he could own because he built it. Stone shed on a mountain. Everything he ate arrived. Grain on a donkey from a granary attached to a temple, measured out in front of him by a man with a roll. Water carried up a hill by somebody who was not allowed to live at the top of it. Fish caught by a man employed to catch fish for the crew. He was fed extremely reliably, and not one bite of it came out of ground he had any claim on. And then, at the end of it, given a wall and a painter and the chance to specify anything at all. Any afterlife he could describe, he asked for a field, with water running through it and a crop coming up, the thing he never had, in the one place where nobody could take it off him. And she is in it, not standing behind him as decoration. Working the row beside him, and then sitting opposite him at a full table with the crop in behind them. Iineferti, who will grow old in a house on that lane and lose her teeth and wear her spine through and go blind. In the picture, she is neither old nor blind. It is fair to say that every workman in this village had a version of this on his wall. That it was the standard thing to put there, and that reading a personal wish into a convention is a risk. That is true. It is also true that somebody had to pay a man to paint it and choose how big it would be. And it is the biggest thing in the room. And you can go along the hillside and look at what the neighbors ask for. One of them, a sculptor from this same reign, put gardens on his walls, vines on frames, a pool, a man lifting water with a pole and a counterweight, which is the machine from the real gardens down on the plain, painted into the next world. Nobody along this hillside asked for a palace. Nobody asked to be a priest, or an officer, or a king. What these men wanted forever, one after another, all the way along the slope, was a garden or a field and water in it, and somebody they liked sitting across the table. That is the whole ambition of the street. Quebecnet goes on cutting. His own chamber is above his father's on the same slope, and he will be a servant in the place of truth for the rest of his working life. And his own name will go on a register kept by a scribe he has known since they were boys. The lane does not pause for this. And for as long as there is a family, somebody comes up this hill with bread. That is the entire mechanism. Not the paint, not the spells, not the wooden men. Somebody walking 200 meters uphill on a set day and saying a name out loud. When that stops, the room stops working, and everybody here knew it. They come out and shut it. There are 3 small mud brick pyramids above this tomb in a walled courtyard and a chapel where the family will keep coming, with bread, at the festivals, up the hill from their own houses for as long as there is a family. The chamber below is finished. Nothing else is going into it. And they walk back down, 200 meters, 10 minutes, into a lane where everybody knows exactly where they have been. Somebody will have kept food. Tomorrow is another of the 5 days. The day after that, the year starts. And after that, the crew goes back over the ridge, and there is a place open on the list. Iineferti has years left. She will bury more of her own children in that room. She will pay a craftsman to cut a line into a stone about the darkness she is seeing in the daytime. And when she goes up the hill for the last time, she will go into the same chamber and be laid beside him, and somebody will seal the door again. After that, the door stays shut for more than 3,000 years, long enough for the village to be abandoned, for a monastery to be built over part of it, for the language on those walls to stop being read by anybody at all, and for the name of the place to become a word in a language that did not exist yet. And then on the 31st of January, 1886, after 7 days of digging, 4 men from the village at the bottom of the hill come through into a room and hold up a light. The furniture is still standing where it was put. The flowers on the babies are still there. And on the east wall, a green field, exactly as bright as the day it was finished. But that is a very long way off. Right now, it is the last of the 5 days. The river is at the bottom of its year. And the people who buried him this week are asleep on their roofs in the heat. Down on the plain, nothing is growing. The fields are stubble and cracked earth, and they have been for weeks. And somewhere far to the south of here, past the frontier, past the last of the rocks, the water has already started. It is rising against a stair of stone marked in a temple on an island. Somebody has already looked at it. A boat has already left. 1 day ahead of the flood, at most 2, the news is coming down this river. In a few days, the water here will start to lift, so slowly that only the mark on the stake will tell you. Then it will turn green and taste terrible, and everybody will be delighted. Then it will go brown and heavy and climb. The fields will go under. The mud will come down and settle. And in the spring, there will be barley. And tomorrow is the first day of the first month, and the whole thing begins again. People will clean. People will give small gifts. Somebody will pour out a jar into a shallow dish in a room with a niche in the wall. And the men of the village will put down their cups and go back over the ridge. There is a corridor up there that is not finished. The scribe will start a new roll, 40 names down the right-hand edge, dates in black. And above most of them, when the time comes, 1 word or 2 in red. That is what a year is here. That is what it was last year and what it will be next year. And the man who is not on the list anymore is up on the hill in a green field, in his good clothes, working land that belongs to him. And there is a new man holding the brush. The scribe who kept this village's records for the last 30-odd years has stepped back, and the one taking over will hold the post for nearly half a century into the reigns of kings not yet born. He's the one with the library. He is about to start writing everything down. 4 days later, the mark on the stake is underwater. Nobody sees it happen. There is no sound to it. This valley falls about as much across 1,000 kilometers as a gentle roof falls across a room. So the flood does not arrive, it seeps. Somebody comes down in the morning and the line they scratched yesterday is gone. And then it is everybody's news at once. Children run along the bank looking at it. People come out of houses to stand and look at water, which is a thing you can only understand if you have watched a river go down for 4 months. It is coming up. That is the entire message. It is coming up, and it is on time. 15 days from now, priests far to the south will go down to the water and make an offering for a good one. 5 days after that, an entire town will get ceremonially drunk for the same reason. And in between, up on a hill above the flood line, a crew will be counting wicks in a corridor and marking a list. None of this has ever had anything to do with them. In 3 weeks, the fields will be gone. In 6, the villages will be islands. Boats will go over the top of somebody's stubble. There will be frogs at night in numbers you would not believe. And a gilded barge will come down the middle of it with rams' heads at both ends, while everybody stands on the bank and watches the gold go past. And on the roofs of 68 houses, people will lie down in the moving air and look up at a band of light across the middle of the sky, which they have been told since they were small is a river, with fields on the far side of it, and a man they knew out in one of them in a pleated kilt behind a plough. So that is a year. A river that empties itself and fills itself, and a country arranged entirely around the fact that it does. 3 seasons, and 5 days left over. And a village of 68 houses in a desert with no water in it, whose people made the most beautiful rooms in the world and were paid in wheat. Their names were Sennedjem and Iineferti and Quebecnet. There was a scribe with terrible handwriting who kept the library. There was a doctor the state paid for. There was a man whose job was scorpions. There was somebody who missed 4 days of work because he was sitting with a friend who was ill, and somebody else who wrote that down. And under the hill, in a small room nobody would open again for 3,000 years, there is a wall with a green field on it, water in blue lines, barley over their heads, 2 people at a table with the crop bin behind them. It is the brightest thing in there. It always was. And it is still exactly the color it was on the day it was finished. The river is going up now. In a few weeks, it will be over everything. And then it will go down again, and there will be a harvest and 5 days that do not count. And after that, another year. And it will do that 3,000 more times before anybody thinks to build a dam. You are standing on a riverbank in the dark, an hour before the sun. The water is low and blackened, barely moving. In a little while, it will begin to rise, and it will not stop. And nobody standing here is worried about that. They have seen it. Their parents saw it. It has never once not happened.